I was at lunch trying to digest a lot of the stuff that we heard earlier. And,
along with others, digesting others.
oh yes, it was great. And you know, I know this is for the benefit of the students here and just science education in general. And a lot of the things that has been talked about here, I think we're all in agreement with. I think it's a key thing that we understand evolution and that really our society understands it. How that affects us individually as far as our beliefs and our lives go is one thing, but I think the presenters here have made a good case for the fact that evolution is very important to our country, period. So, in that sense, I've got a question here that I wrote out that what I'd like you to do is when you discuss it, try to keep in mind or discuss it in light of the education of our students in this country, which is what we're really talking about here. But and it was kind of one of the things on that commentary after the first talker there was regarding the discrepancy between the scientific community's acceptance of the facts and theory of evolution, regardless of their religious belief or non-belief, and the public's acceptance of the facts and theory. If you could discuss the following three things. The effective use of high-tech media presentations for maybe like sectarian indoctrination, things like that, that might affect what we're seeing in the public, polls that are taken. Also, the rise in numbers of non-religious or nuns that we see too. I mean, that's kind of interesting when you see how creationism, like Dr. Numbers talked about, is being exported and things like that. And then something that I find kind of tough to deal with is the unabashed display of clearly scientifically ignorant statements by politicians, religious leaders, and others. But in that frame of maybe how's that affecting our students in their perception of evolution, those three things. Maybe you could discuss that. See what you come up with.
Could you remind me of the first thing you know?
Yes, let me get my glasses back on here. First thing was just the effectiveness of our media in maybe presenting one aspect or the other. Because, believe me, when I watch the news, I'm going, you know, I just can't believe some of the stuff that's promoted in the news that, you know, I would look at as being so unscientific. And I mean, I know we don't have control over that, but in respect to the polls that we see about what people accept as far as evolution and don't accept, how does that affect the, you know, things?
Well, I don't worry so much about the news. I worry about other kinds of television media.
Yeah, I'm talking about all media, not just the news, but all the high-tech.
Television, movies, YouTube,
Yeah, exactly.
the internet, digital communications. Uneven. I mean, I think we shouldn't be too gloomish and doomish, because there actually are some really good evolution programs out there. PBS has got some really good stuff. And PBS has got some excellent programs on the creationism and evolution controversy itself. The Judgment Day on the Dover trial was a very good job. They've just done this 2-hour documentary biopic, if you will, on Darwin, Darwin's Darkest Hour. That was quite a good job. Very soon, January, there's going to be the release of the new Paul Bettany, Jennifer Connelly movie, Creation is the name of the movie, and it's about Charles and Emma Darwin. And it's about their family life and the death of their daughter, their beloved daughter Annie, and other problems. I'm one of the few people this side of the border who's seen it, because it hasn't been released yet in the United States, and I think it's a very good job. I encourage you, actually, to when they do announce, I think it may be the 18th, but that date may change. But if it's not January 18th, whatever the closest weekend to the opening day, have a viewing party. Take a bunch of students and friends and go see an interesting movie on science for a change. They do a good job. They do a good job. They talk about not demonizing Darwin. I mean, I talked about demonizing Darwin. This movie shows Darwin the way most people have never thought of him before, as the father of 10 children and a very loving spouse. So, so much for the racist, sexist, etc. But there's some very good treatments of evolution. You can find some on the Discovery Channel. You can find some on the National Geographic Channel. You can also find some really awful stuff on those exact same channels. So it's a very mixed bag. It's hopeless except for maybe creation, which actually doesn't deal that much with the science, but what science it does deal with, it deals with accurately, thank goodness. Movies, you can almost give up on getting accurate treatment of evolution in movies. It's pretty hopeless. You get... it's not quite so bad as 3-story tall ants anymore. I mean, you don't quite get those movies very much, but various sorts of genetic disaster flicks are about as good as you can get, and the science definitely gets kind of distorted and tweaked in one direction or another. So as far as the internet is concerned, it's like the internet. The internet is full of goodness and badness, and one of the things that students and everybody needs to learn is how to filter out the chaff from the good stuff. So I've been very critical of the press coverage of evolution, but I think it's also important to recognize that there are good things out there. And part of it, of course, is that the media is doing something differently from what we're doing in a classroom. The job of the media is to tell a story. And we as scientists have to do a better job helping the media representatives, the reporters and so forth, who by and large are not trained in science themselves, helping them understand that we have really interesting stories. We're not always doing this, and so I lay part of the blame at the feet of scientists. Just a quick anecdote before my colleagues take over. I got a report just recently from one of my Citizens for Science group members. There are local groups who really do wonderful things to help keep evolution in the schools. And she was very frustrated because she was trying to get scientists at the local university to talk to the press about the importance of teaching evolution. None of them were willing to talk to the press. We got to get over that.
I heard all of your problems being the same problem. And I think that the same problem is that we as educators have done a relatively poor job of teaching the logic of scientific discovery. So I'm using particular phrases there. I consider that really important. It's changed, once I realized it, it changed all of the ways that I teach. And so I'm now much more demanding of my students. I thought about your question in relation to the healthcare debate where some physicians really don't want to use evidence-based medicine. That frightens me. I certainly don't want to have to meet that physician in an emergency room. I'll be more careful going to doctors' offices to find out where they sit on that debate, because that's an important issue, and it's a similar one. And so all of those things, yeah, reporters aren't trained in science, but they should be trained in the logic of scientific discovery so that they should, at the very least, if they are, and all citizens who are educated. And that means that we should get everyone to be educated about the logic of scientific discovery. It's probably the single most important thing that those of us who care about our democracy should be doing. So when I see people who are claiming to be creationists and they're running for elective office, I'm frightened there too. I understand the psychology of it, but I don't respect it. On the other hand, we do have some fabulous scientists in our House of Representatives, for instance. One whom I think about a lot is Rush Holt, who was a physicist and who worked at Princeton for many years, and he represents science really well. We need more people with a science education who are capable of talking about that. And so I think that that's in our lap. We're educators and we can do something about it. I'm no longer interested when students tell me that they want to go to medical school. What I want to know is, can they think their way through alternative predictions from alternative hypotheses? Can they tell me what kinds of studies we might do in the kind of science that I do, which really does not require a fancy vocabulary to understand it? You know, simple concepts. Anybody should be able to understand what I do. Maybe I don't explain it as well as I could the first time, but I can do it again. I can help them read. We really need to meet this challenge, and it's all of us who are science educators. So, yeah, I think it's bad news in general when people do those things, but I think that my response has to be personal because I interact with students. I have to tell them, well, you need to understand this. See what you can do.
Telling Dr. Scott, we happen to work at Disneyland, so we deal with a lot of young kids out there. And I like talking about this subject. It's a passion of mine. But some of the commentary that I get from these kids, there's just absolutely zero critical thinking skills. And that worries me. I mean, it worries me as a citizen of the United States of America. We've got a lot of people out there, young people too, that they're really out in left field when it comes to just being able to critically analyze the situation, and that affects everything, our policies, our voting, everything. And I
make a quick point. I agree, and we've got a great opportunity as educators and people doing public outreach, and we should really take advantage of it. And, I'm worried also, and what I see, of course everyone sees with the internet, is you can choose your news media outlets, and we don't have, to the same degree that we might in an optimal society, a shared common news outlet. People are reading, the news is highly selective, and you can find what you want. You can listen to people that share your particular values, and it's difficult in particular when science becomes politicized. And we suffer from that, I think, particularly in this country, say, compared to Europe, where a lot of the green issues and sustainability issues and global heating, it's viewed through an ideological lens here in the States that it's not in Europe. You can find people on the right and on the left in Europe who will agree on the CO2 emissions increase data. But here, instead, we have groups that are investing a lot of energy in trying to debunk the data or deny the data. And this is something important, and somehow we need some accountability. I don't know exactly how to do it, but there needs to be some follow-up and correction on stories, and to do it in a civil way as much as we can, but to be very thorough in doing that. Another thing that we might do, and I don't know why there's not more discussion of it, but is national curriculum science standards. It's so politically charged, but we don't have any. And so it's, pardon me? Being proposed right now. Yeah, and so it's shocking that we don't. And so students can show up or go through school during their most formative years and really get what the local community deems as valuable science. And we've got a long ways to go just to push. We do some of the best science in the world here in the States, but we do some of the worst in terms of education and dissemination of the data. And so I think that's all educators really have an opportunity to make a difference there.
If I could follow up a little bit on that, coming from a public school perspective, as a teacher in the public schools and the high schools, what we do is we find ourselves sort of at the whim of our local school boards, and they change pretty rapidly sometimes. I mean, they could change 2 years, or someone could drop out year to year, and you may get one person in there who has a specific agenda item that they want to push. So what I see happening quite often is that you've got to come up with sort of the most vanilla piece that you can, so that you're not rocking any boats anywhere, anytime. And that gets back to what you were saying. It's very dangerous to do that, because you're not playing to any one side, but you end up not playing to anybody at all, just doing the thing that will rock the boat the least. And I have to tell you, in our work, in the films that we've produced, when we go and show them to other high schools, they just sort of sit there, jaws agape. Like, you're actually talking about this in your school? You're engaging your kids in this conversation in your school? And we say, yes, that it's what has to happen. But the sad part is, we only have 1,400 kids in our school. There's a lot more kids that aren't getting that kind of stuff, and but we are in that really sort of delicate point now. Plus, I also want to take a little bit of a swipe at No Child Left Behind, which has sort of made you a slave to the numbers. And in doing that, it's like, what do you not want to teach in order to get to what you have to get your number, so that the government will deem you worthy of money or attention or support? And you get caught in that catch-22 so often that you're focused here and all of these other things that need to get done that would allow students at the college level to get to even higher levels from there. We're stuck in that sort of that hamster wheel at times, and that's really it's hard. It's a hard nut to crack, and we're trying.
Yeah, we shouldn't be confusing no child left untested, as I've heard the teachers calling it. We shouldn't confuse No Child Left Behind with standards. Okay, they're different kinds of phenomena, and we shouldn't confuse the idea of state or even national standards with local control. We will have local control of education in this country. I mean, it is so institutionalized, it is so worshipped, and people just, the hair on their back of their necks goes up if you try to change it at all. There are advantages actually to local control of education. Curriculum is not one of them. Okay. There's absolutely no reason why fourth graders in Dubuque should be learning long division in the first semester, and in Austin, Texas, learning it in third grade. And so if you happen to move from one city to another, you may never learn long division. I mean, this is quite silly. The idea of having generally well-prepared standards for what should be taught in history and English literature and mathematics and science that would be available to all the states, and possibly even to some degree mandatory, to the degree that the state that the federal government can exert some financial carrots and sticks there, is an idea, I think, whose time has come. David is completely right when he says that it's an astonishing thing to anybody from Europe or Japan or any other developed nation that we lack a national standard, that we have such a patchwork education system.
But Gene,
and of course,
isn't that socialism?
Oh, let's get a new question.
Yes,
hard to imagine. Hard to imagine.
Don, then Doug, then Gerard.
Dr. Mendel, you spoke about the case you were involved in where an alleged crime had been committed by injecting this woman, and the prosecutor, I guess, thought, let me get somebody in here to do some DNA testing, and then the judge admits the evidence. That's a striking moment to me. Do you know, I don't know, it's a little different from your topic, but I'm kind of interested in who those people are and what their education was and what their views of things were that made them open to that possibility and willing to pursue it.
Yeah, you put your finger on something very interesting that would not have happened in most places. It's very individualistic. So in that case, it was a very sharp and proactive district attorney who just listened to somebody coming through the door that was telling a story, and he decided to do something right away. It made a lot of work that, for a lot of people, that was uncompensated. Like with my lab, actually, I never mentioned it to NSF, but the supply monies came out of an NSF grant. There was no remuneration. They did purchase part of one air ticket. And so really the whole thing was just kind of people wanting to do it. And that often doesn't happen. And the scary thing about the courts is when it comes to admitting new evidence, you try to find out, well, what's the court's stance on valid scientific evidence? You'd think there would be something very hard and fast that would be reliable. And it turns out it's like anything else. It's very historically contingent. It's built on precedent from other cases, what makes good evidence. And there's a realization that it doesn't work that well when things are new, because it hasn't had, new methods haven't had time to be, have this long demonstration of being embraced by the community, being reliable in all these cases. So in the admissibility cases, we had portion of the trial, we had the opportunity to show that it was reproducible, that it had confidence intervals at a certain level, that it was at least being tried by other members of the community, even though it might be controversial. In this case, it was all about phylogenetic analyses, so it was straightforward by this time, because the community's been working for 50 years to have reproducible, well-justified methods, but a great deal of power resides in the judge as the gatekeeper on admissibility of evidence. And you just have to have a good judge, a judge who's open-minded and smart, and that's...
Do you have any sense of who those people were, what their education was that made them? And likewise, your question with the jury. I mean, people say, oh, the jury will never get this. If they were more scientifically educated, they would get it. You would be able to bring scientific arguments into the court, and the jury could follow it. Why not?
That's right. And so that's what we rely on in a democracy or in a situation like that, is that the citizenry will be able to think critically. Like Dr. Gowaty said, it's crucial, it's fundamental. So more than facts, we should be teaching, and we do in many cases, how to think critically. But the education, Keith Stutz was a smart attorney, and so was Durwood Conk, the judge. And so we just lucked out. And I think we all lucked out with Johnson, the judge in, Judge Jones. I mean, I was prepared for the worst. I was on edge. I had no idea that the guy was an independent thinker. I just thought, well, he's a political appointee. Here we go. It's going to be a political finding, but it wasn't. And so it gave me confidence for a while in the system. But education is great. Education is the key. It's hard to do, but it's the key.
Okay, next question. I believe Dr. Schwarzenegger, then Dr. Fazal.
As we know, many people have demonized Darwin, but you don't have to go far to see that those who would defend Darwin in these days, in this day, are also demonized. From Carl Giberson, an evangelical who wrote the book, defending Darwin, to just going to an email to me about this conference from a Pepperdine alum, who I would quote that Eugenie Scottt is perhaps the most blatant religious bigot and ideologue in the planet. And so these are the kinds of things. My bigger question is...
That was the conclusion you all came to, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the bigger question is, how much time do we invest in responding to these kinds of things? Ad hominem attacks, I think we can maybe get rid of those. But when someone comes up like John Baumgartner, who was a Los Alamos geologist, has come up with this plate tectonic theory about the flood, caused all of the continents to move away from each other at meters per day, and maybe miles per day, and that's how it all happened within a few years. How much time do we invest in responding to those kinds of claims?
Well, it was a two-part question. How do you respond to the ad hominem attacks? And how do you respond to the crank science? The good news is that the crank science hasn't changed a lot. And Baumgartner's runaway subduction, or as it's called somewhat properly derogatorily, continental zip, has been addressed. I mean, that's the thing. I think that the thing that I would really encourage all of the faculty to do when they discuss the attacks on evolution, the alleged science of creation science or intelligent design, make sure that the students and other members of the public you're talking to understand that we're not just dismissing these arguments out of hand. We have looked at them. We have examined Baumgartner's runaway subduction model and shown why it violates basic laws of physics and makes no sense in the view of how the rest of the world operates. So we properly reject it. We don't reject it just because Baumgartner is a conservative Christian. We reject it because it's dumb science. And you can generally find places, the web, and there's lots of books. You can come to our website for direction. Talkorigins.org is a very good archive for specific responses to Baumgartner and other claims of the creationists, including the beloved second law of thermodynamics that you were talking about, Donna. These things are rubber ducks. You push them down and they still come up someplace else. As far as the ad hominem attacks are concerned, I'm not the best person to go to for that. I haven't been referred to as Darwin's golden retriever for nothing. I mean, I'm not very aggressive myself, and I tend to just ignore them. And one of the difficulties of being a dread accommodationist, as I am sometimes referred. You can sort of hear the the lips sneering over the teeth there. Accommodationist, like tolerance is so bad, right? I basically I don't respond. I don't respond to the ad hominem. There are plenty of people out there that have a whole lot more testosterone than I do, and I let them make these arguments. I mean, I'll stand on my record. Anybody who thinks that I'm a religious bigot is not paying attention. But quite honestly, people from, I mean, there are some conservative Christians, like I assume your Pepperdine correspondent. There are some people from the atheist community who have a real tough time understanding how I can be not religious, but not anti-religious. There's far too many negatives in that sentence, but hopefully you'll understand what I'm talking about. It's possible to be non-religious without being anti-religious. I'm very interested in religion. It doesn't speak to me. That's just the way I am. It spoke to me once. Who knows? Maybe in the future. Probably not. But it doesn't speak to me now. But that doesn't mean I'm out to get Jesus. Okay. And just because you're non-religious doesn't mean you're attacking that you personally are being attacked by such a person. So the only thing you can do is just stand on your record and refer people to things I've written, things I've said, but yeah, that. Can't help but be kind of surprised when stuff like that bubbles up.
Okay,
Thank you for sharing.
We're going to have another response right here, and then we'll get to Gerard's question.
It's interesting on the high school level. A few years ago, I directed Inherit the Wind, and you have to also deal with people in the community. I had some students come up to me saying, I'd love to be in your play, but Mom and Dad won't let me be in. One of my stars in Inherit the Wind was in tears about a week before the show, and I went up to her, and she was an evangelical Christian who came to her own decision to be involved in the play and realized it was an attack on Christianity. But I sat her down and said, what's the problem? How can I help? And she said, well, my parents aren't coming. They told me that either I drop out or if I choose to stay in the play, then they won't come to see. And it was a hard moment. And of course, I've been called, at one time, the Antichrist by a parent at a parent conference for doing a play on the Holocaust because of the anti-Catholic stance, apparently, that I've been called a self-serving communist. And also, people of your kind by one parent. And I said, what do you mean by that? It's like, I was called a self-serving Jew once, and I was like, I hate to tell you this, but I was raised Catholic. But it's like it's throwing out that teacher moment in the sense that when you're trying to talk to your students, it ripples out to the public, and you're trying to get parents in and say, look, come to see the play, come talk to us. But there's so many entrenched people that it's sometimes you feel like you're shoveling sand against the tide. It's very frustrating, but you keep hitting.
Okay, Gerard?
With respect to the title of the conference, does Darwin still matter? My answer would be yes. And since a lot of physics have been thrown out, I would, simply look at Niels Bohr. We still look at the Bohr model of the atom. It's wrong, but we still look at it. We still look at how the Greeks explained retrograde motion. It's wrong, but we learn from what, how the past, ancient people or not so ancient people thought, and we learn from their mistakes. And I think it's important not to forget that, even though we may not agree with it, there may be some faults in it, but still it needs to be put out there. I'm maybe your comments on that.
Personally, Darwin matters because he was right about a lot of natural selection. What we've done since Darwin in the neosynthesis is learn a lot about a mechanism of heredity in relation to natural selection. One of the things that we've done is realize that there are other really important models besides natural selection that we have to attend to, ones like drift. Darwin matters because Darwin was right. Yeah. So, we should, if people think that, there are some details that Darwin didn't get right, but You know, he didn't know as much. So, okay.
There are things that were right, things that were not so right. That's not what matters. It's still important to discuss it and not to just put it away because, for whatever reason. I mean, there just seems to be such a, when I teach the, Big Bang Theory, there's the same problem. It's like, where did it come from? How do we know it's right? But we talk about it, and then when we finally get to Wilson and Penzias and we talk about their observational results, and we say, okay, they found these results in '67 by accident, and this is predicted by people in the '40s. And the students, they go, oh, okay. And so maybe the problem why people, I don't understand why the Darwin thing is such an issue. Why can't we talk about it, discuss what's right, discuss what's wrong, and why are people so opposed to it? Is it because it's the religion thing? Is it stepping on people's toes? Is that the problem?
I asked the first question that was asked in this conference. I asked it, and I asked Ron Numbers in response to his vivid descriptions of the spread of creationism and anti-evolutionism across the globe. What is so intuitively compelling about the idea? And I've heard a lot of people talk about the religious stuff as a response. Personally, I don't think that's strong enough. So I don't feel like we've got an answer to that question yet. Your question is the same as mine, said differently, but it's the same question. And I do think that that is a key question that's on the table. I do think that religion may have something to do with it, but I think there's something else. It just doesn't strike me as an adequate explanation for why, at this particular moment in history, there is this dramatic spread of anti-evolutionism and fundamentalist religion across the globe. It's very interesting, and I don't know the answer, but I don't think that it's just that religion's fun and compelling.
Because when I teach a course in science to people who are non-science majors, they really do not understand science. It's this thing that's very hard. They've been turned off by it. So I'm wondering if the backlash is because of this. I try to explain to my students it starts with observations. Real basic science starts with observations. We observe something we don't understand. And they're amazed by that. That could be something so simplistic. And maybe it's just pure ignorance.
So that suggests that a method we might use in teaching is to describe how some really fundamentally interesting and useful ideas like pi was discovered. I mean, it was an empirical discovery. A lot of people playing around with angles and circles trying to build things. It was empirically derived. So maybe if we talked about that, I always thought that any third grader could bring up, could discover pi. In fact, probably a second grader. And if we gave them more chances to discover fundamentals, maybe they'd like science more. Maybe if that was part of our education.
That's the other thing, is that they don't know how to discover. I will have my students go and just make a simple plot of the moon with respect to the zenith, plot the day, the time, where they're at, draw the picture, and I'm amazed at how many times they come back to me and they'll say, where did the moon go? It was there, now it's gone. And they'll say, oh, the moon's up all day. This idea of discovery is missing, I think, from education, maybe from the very beginning. And they attribute science to something being very complicated. People with pocket protectors and calculators, computers, they don't understand that science can be lots of fun. It's about observing. They don't understand the essence of science.
Actually, I'm going to disagree with you. I think that the first step in science, it's not a big disagreement. The first step in science is asking a question. Mm-hmm. And then it's the observation. In one sense, maybe the observation might cause you to ask a question, but we shouldn't leave out that questioning component, because that is really where the scientific experience begins. I don't think we're really disagreeing.
And I think...
But I always start with observation first. Maybe it's what comes first, the chicken or the egg. I don't know.
It's something I struggle with as a professor too. It's something I struggle with as a professor too. We think a lot of students, and not the ones here, of course, but a lot of students think science comes in textbooks. That science is facts. Memorizing facts, and unfortunately, I think a lot of times that's the way we teach it. It's about memorizing a bunch of facts, and who likes doing that, right? And really, science is about what I always say, science is about what we don't know. And the facts, the stuff in the textbooks, that's the background information you need in order to do science. So, you know, I try to say I'm mixing it up in this class. I'm going to try to teach you the background information, but I also want to give you opportunities to use that information to ask questions. But it's hard, and it's also frightening for them sometimes to take that leap and think, because in this world of standardized testing, they want to get the right answer. And sometimes taking a guess might mean they're wrong. And they freeze up. And then some, I don't know how many times I've heard, I'm sure you have too, just tell me the answer so I can learn it. When you're just trying to get them to think it. They're like, just tell me I'll memorize it. No, I want you to think your way to it. So I think all of us are talking about similar things, but in terms of what I can do is just provide more opportunities, and you can do, which you do, provide more opportunities to think, right? And ask those questions that we're all talking about.
On that. That's the two are inseparable.
It's really the difference between learning science and doing science. I think in public education, we've learned science for a long time. Like she said, we're going to get as many facts into you. We have you for 47 minutes a day, 180 days. I have to jam as many facts into your head as I possibly can. We need to stop doing that. Yeah, and now you're educated. Bye, thank you. But we need to start doing science. That's the difference, is getting the kids, you know, not giving them the sheet with some of the answers on it and fill in the blanks, but give them the blank sheet of paper and say, go out and observe and come back with what you know, and then let's talk about it. And I love your question, because I don't know, if I thought at the beginning, I would have counted how many times you said talk, discuss, talk to, learn, discuss. That's the key. We don't do that often enough in terms of when we're educating our kids, is just throw out a question at the beginning of your class. And Eric is watching him in the classroom is great, because he'll put a question on the board and then just sit there with his arms folded. And then the kids will start to say, okay, well, what does that question mean? Good question. Let's talk. And let's talk about that question. And we don't allow our kids to do that often enough. We're at the high school level, and you said a second grader, just throw the stuff on the floor, like Legos, bam, play. Okay, how you doing that? What colors did you choose? Why'd you choose those colors? Let's have those conversations with a 5 and 6 and 7-year-old and get them into that pattern. It doesn't have to just be science. It can be English. It can be social studies. It can be anything. But we, for so long as educators, have felt that we are the arbiters of information. Yeah. Well, guess what? In this day and age, there is more information. The amazing fact that I tell my kids all the time is, in one day's New York Times, there is more information than the average person knew in their lifetime in the 1700s. In one day of the New York Times. We don't know everything anymore. We know what we know, and we've got to bring it out and let them engage in it.
Okay, we're going to let a student take the last question in the back. So, last question.
Wanted to ask a question of what do you think Darwin would say in response to educating our students to think critically? There's this idea of people not being able to think critically, and is that an evolutionary step from whatever we are now to the next level?
I don't think that it's an evolutionary step. I think when you put people when people are in a situation where it is useful to ask a question and devise a way to get to the answer, that they will do it. So, in fact, I see this as an ecological problem. And for instance, when I ask my students a question in my class on evolutionary dynamics of sexual conflict, I was bowled over 2 years ago when I said, it's like a cat in heat. And they all looked at me like I was nuts. They'd never seen a cat in heat. Was I nuts to even imagine that they would know what a cat in heat was like? And so then I realized that most of their answers to me, yes, that's part of the problem. They're never outdoors. They've got closed windows. In the city, there are feral cats who are screaming and mating at will. So, yes, of course, the information's there. Part of the problem is that I see in my undergraduates is that very few of them have what I call authentic knowledge, something where they actually made the discovery, something that they saw. I ask my ornithology students now, these are my graduate students, whether robins hop or walk. And it's amazing how many of them can't answer that question. And that I tell them they can't come back in the lab until they can give me an authoritative answer. And so partly it's this issue of being in a situation where the question presents itself and you are in a situation where you have to at least try to get an answer. That's what we lack in general, I think. We should ban TVs.
I'm sorry. I think if you look at the Victorian age, there was that idea of the citizen scientist, even Darwin, not a specifically trained person. And if we can start talking about that again, instead, let's have the citizen scientist. Scott, Josh, and I became citizen scientists by trying to learn about Darwin and then making a film. So book upon book, talk upon talk, and then just telling the kids, all right, if they have a question, I'll find out the answer. Where? Find out the answer. Dig. You might go down a blind alley. That's part of the learning process too. Don't just Google it. Get outside, become the citizen scientist.
Okay, I think we're going to end it. Thank you so much for being a part of this conference. I hope it generates lots of thoughts and conversations in the upcoming weeks. We'll see you here in 50 years for the next anniversary. We'll save your spot for you. So again, Chris, is there anything you want to add? No, okay. Again, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.